have the confidence to say, stop, let me talk. This is how I actually feel. Because a lot of decisions that was made for me in my life, it was the teachers, it was the educators, it was the
Yeah.
social workers who made the decisions for me in education. That they never listened to what I had to say, or the
Mm,
teacher who used to make me do that special work. I think it's use your voice, talk about how you
yeah.
feel, and if that person doesn't listen, find somebody else to listen, because you will find that one person who will stop and say, hold on, this isn't right. Let me speak on your
Mm,
behalf. Because that's when your allyship comes in, and that's how you know you find that one person to support you. And again, it goes back to having that one teacher, or that one person who believes in you,
yeah.
and the difference it can make. So I would say, open up. And for me personally, for males, would be it's okay to get emotional and cry. Because I was always told you couldn't. Crying makes you gay. Well, I must have cried an awful lot, but I definitely did. But I don't think I think it's being able to talk about your emotions.
Jamie, welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
Hello, hello. I am fantastic. Thank you very much. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. But I will say today has been one of those days where the ableism has abled hard. And I've had to have quite a few arguments with people about things that I just thought were fundamental basic human rights. And clearly that's not always the case. People don't always understand. So I'm good, but I'm feeling a bit burnt out by the ableists. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, here, I think we all get that, don't we? At least daily we're faced with it. And it's just like it hits that point where it's like, hold on a second, I need a reset. So you take time for you after this.
Oh, do you know what? I can't wait. I've already got my dinner planned. I've planned what bubble bath I'm gonna have in my bath. Like I've planned it all out. I'm genuinely so excited. But before I
Oh,
get to any of that, I get to have this wonderful conversation with you, which is making my day so much better.
yay. I'm excited to be here. So apologies it took me so long to come, but we got there in the end.
Oh, and that's what matters. Okay, so I'm so happy that you're here. But the first question that I like to ask every single guest on the podcast is, how do you refer to your disability?
So medical terms, I have ocular albinism with nystagmus, which is a fun way of saying my eyes like to go for little spins. That's my nystagmus. And I'm the same as an albino, only with pigmentation.
Mm-hmm.
I am autistic. I have ADHD. I have back scoliosis and apparently I collect disabilities like Pokemon cards. But for myself, I tell people I'm disabled, but it took
Mm-hmm.
me a while to get to that point, if you know what I mean. So I say person with
Yeah.
disability. And then I was like, what am I doing? This is part of my identity. I want to wear like a badge of honor. So I started saying disabled person after many conflicts. We know some people don't like to say
Yeah.
one and then the other. And it's like, give me the right to choose my identity. But with myself, I think it's got to the stage where I say I'm disabled, but I tell everybody now I'm a registered blind ADHD rhino because rhinos are just chubby unicorns with bad eyesight. If you don't believe that, please Google it. They do have bad eyesight. And then, yeah, so that is, in a nutshell, how I probably describe myself now.
Yeah. I honestly love the fact that you call yourself a rhino because I think that that is just the best thing ever. Like, yeah, chubby unicorn, bad eyesight, but here we are. We work with what we've got. And actually, there's so much to be said in that because working with what you've got, like what you've got is what you've got. You can't
Yeah,
change what you have and you haven't got. So actually, if you can make it almost work for you and put your own spin on it, I think that's so important.
100%. And like when I was younger, so I am very openly gay. When I was younger, it was
Mm.
very obvious to everybody, bar me, that I was gay. And the kids used to say to me, where's your unicorn? Trying to be a bit of a smart arse with me.
Mm.
And I was just like, I don't know why, but when I seen this book, my friend gave me this book and said chubby unicorns. And I was just like, rhinos are just chubby unicorns. And see, since that moment, this has stuck with me. So in a way as well, I'm like, yes, rhinos technically are disabled if we think about it,
Mm.
having bad eyesight. But equally, it's just like it's taking those words that used to hurt me. And it's like, I will have my chubby unicorn at the door.
Yeah, and it's reclaiming that power as well,
Yeah.
which is exactly how I feel about the word disabled, as I think that I use it because I want to reclaim the power that's in it because for so long people saw it as such a bad thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, 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 incorrect. It's one of the most powerful things in the world. And so I love that reclamation of power and having that like personal and important mark that you're making on how you identify, because at the end of the day, like, we all identify completely differently, and that's why I like to start this podcast with asking people how they want to be identified, because I think if you get that wrong, then the entire conversation and actually your entire experience is completely overshadowed by the fact that someone has got this wrong for you.
100%. And like, I think that's one of the biggest things we have in this community, isn't it? It's almost like we have communities inside communities
Oh,
with all
yeah.
these different ways of identifying. And there seems to be people kind of play like trump cards with it. It's just like, well, I'm saying this, so you should say this too, and you're wrong. And I think as content creators, we get it all the time in our posts. It's just like, oh, you shouldn't say this. But I think, well, actually, why is the issue on how we want to self-identify when the real issue is the systemic ableism, the inaccessibility, and the fact that we're treated the mess on? But you want to talk about my right to identify? Okay, that seems like such a trivial issue when we think of the bigger picture. So I love that you start your podcast like this.
Oh, thank you. So, moving on, I always like to think about childhood and disability, because I think there can be a real difference between being a disabled child to being a disabled adult. And that's even if you were born disabled or if you acquire your disability, because there's if you acquire your disability, there's a change at some point, like your life changes, there's a big spin. But if you're a disabled child, what I have tend to found is that childhood is very, very different to adulthood in how people relate to your disability. And I wonder, what was that experience like for you?
So oh God, my childhood. Like, I don't want to say it was traumatic because I had really good supportive parents, and I'm a typical Irish family. There's loads of us. Like, if you said
Oh
one
my
thing to
God,
one
me
of us,
too. There's
if we
loads of
have to,
us.
yeah, it's like, so if somebody says something, it's like, I've got my army behind me. Let's go.
Yeah.
But for me, I I was in mainstream education, so I was for like primary school, and I was a special needs kid, and I do that in inverted commas because that label that they put onto me in education, it stuck with me, and I think that was probably for me the biggest catalyst in the internalized ableism I felt as an adult,
Yeah.
because I didn't want to be special no more, so I stopped asking for adjustments. So for me, like I was bullied quite badly. Like, none of the kids wanted to play with a special needs kid. I had a classroom assistant only in the afternoon. And in class, I struggled. Like, I was given
Yeah.
special activities to do, like rearrange the art supply cupboard, which, don't get me wrong, I loved, because I always got to play with the markers and paint, and I love art.
Yeah.
But it was, I think, like when I look back at that as an adult, I'm like, how humiliating for me as a child to
Yeah.
be made to feel so different when I have the same learning capabilities as most of my peers. In fact, I could be probably, I don't want to say smarter because I don't like that word, but do you know what I mean? I could have been more advanced than some of my peers, but
Yeah.
because I had that label, it was like, well, let's treat him different. So I struggled really badly at school with my disability, and I think that impacted obviously my relationships. I was very close to my siblings, but like I didn't really have many friends. And then as that kind of progressed into secondary school, I actually went to specialist education. Again, this word special, I think, again triggers my internalized ableism.
Yeah.
Whenever I say it, I feel comfortable. I don't know why. But when I was in secondary school, it was a class of 6 people and a teacher who had been specially trained, which theoretically sounds amazing. And for those 5 to 6 years, it was kind of like, because we had an additional year, it was amazing. I got that support, but nobody was teaching me what I was going to like when I was leaving education.
Yeah.
Nobody told me that I was going to struggle in the world of employment. And equally, nobody was like kind of dealing with the fact that I had so much internalized ableism. I was traveling an hour to school in the morning, an hour back. My friends were walking to school around the corner. I only had a few friends, so it was very noticeable that I wasn't in the typical mainstream education like they were.
Yeah.
So other kids noticed that and picked on me as well. So it really made building relationships with non-disabled young people really difficult. And so like, I think I was I don't want to say I stayed childlike until quite late on, but at 16 I was still playing with Action Man. I was still playing with my sisters and the Barbies because I love cutting their hairs and ruining them. But like I was still very childlike. At 16 now, if you take a child now at 16, they're sitting out with their friends. I'm not going to
They're
say they're going
basically
clubbing.
adults.
Do you know what I mean? Many adults, whereas I think for me, I had so much innocence because I was the special kid. So I kind of like took a journey there, but I think when I left education, I just fell off an edge of a cliff because I didn't know how to articulate what I needed because it was always kind of spoon fed to me. And
Yeah.
I went back into mainstream education, don't know why, to do A levels in art. And I got so badly bullied, so I did for those 2 years. And I
Yeah.
fell into the wrong crowd. Well, I don't want to say the wrong crowd because they were nice people, but I started smoking, I started drinking, and then I kind of just started spiraling with my mental health. But
Yeah.
that brings us up to adulthood at 18. So that's another question.
But I think what you said about, you know, the word special really getting your internalized ableism, like almost like starting something in your belly. I think that's a really important thing to say, because when we specifically talk about education and we talk about special education, and actually the terminology is so wrong for what it is. It's not special if it's a human need. And I think this is where we've really fall into quite a trap, is that we think special education, oh, it's extra needs, it's extra this, that, and the next thing. And actually we need to have a whole, almost a rebrand, because it's not, it's human needs. And if it's a human need, then it's not special, because we all have different needs. So I can completely understand why talking about it can give you that feeling, because actually upon reflection, and also, you know, you're a bit older now, you have awareness of what internalized ableism, you have awareness of what ableism is. No wonder it's going to spark those feelings in you. And thank you for sharing that with me as well, because it's not always easy to talk about difficult topics like this. And I do appreciate you sharing that on this podcast, because it's not always the nicest thing to think about and re-drag, but actually having these conversations is so important, because as you said, you felt like you were spoon-fed for a little bit too long. And I think this is also a problem that we have with disabled children, is sometimes we can be spoon-fed for a bit too long, because we are seen as a health and safety hazard. People don't know how to treat us. They don't know where we're going. They don't know what we're doing. So the best thing to do is wrap you in cotton wool and hope that nothing on the outside is going to come in. But actually, like you said, when you went back into mainstream education and you get to about 18, 19, actually everything in your life completely changes. And what you meant to do with that when you haven't necessarily had the support in place to prepare you for those moments.
100%. And like it leads to spiraling. Like I was binge drinking at like 17, 18, I was binge drinking, and it was WKD, so it was definitely the most toxic thing I could have been drinking. But you know, like when I think back of then, I stayed in that spiral right through from 18 till my early 20s, maybe mid 20s. I was still spiraling, and it wasn't really until like I was living independently in the city, so it was like I was trying to be independent, but I was still spiraling. I had so much, I don't want to say shame, but it was shame. It was internalized ableism. I also rejected the fact that I was gay because I was already disabled. I didn't want to have that coming out twice experience, and it was very strange. So I was in this real deep spiral. But it wasn't until I kind of met my partner and actually got this really constant friend in my life, got my job where I currently work in now, that I actually started to feel like, oh my goodness, is this what independence feels like? And then it's like I started speaking, and it was like, oh my God, all these emotions and feelings and things that I didn't actually realize I felt until I started articulating it. And then I'd listen back, think, oh my goodness, I never really talked about this. Why was there no support? Why, when I've been taken to the doctor to talk about depression or mental health, was there no talk about actually you could be experiencing internalized ableism, because it does have a detrimental effect, and actually the links and the psychological effects, it's like, well, where was that support? And then when you think of intersectional identities, obviously being gay as well from Northern Ireland wasn't the easiest upbringing. Kids did not like gay guys in Northern Ireland. And I think for me, it was a lot to deal with, but there was no mention of, well, actually, this could be internalized ableism. Actually, you could have internalized homophobia. Like, there was no mention of it. It's like we know it's there, but we tiptoe around it.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really important thing you just said when you were saying, you know, you're talking about, you know, maybe it's depression, maybe it's this and the next thing. And at no point anybody was like, actually, what about internalized ableism? Because when we're talking about mental health, and I'm pretty sure you posted about this, might have been yesterday, saying that when we talk about mental health or depression, we always need to consider internalized ableism as a catalyst for this, because doctors don't have these conversations with us. And if you're in therapy, you need to find a therapist who understands what ableism is, and also what internalized ableism is, because I think 9 times out of 10, very, very generally speaking, a lot of the feelings that internalized ableism can give you are similar to that of depression. And actually, when you unpack it, it's not that you're depressed, it's actually that you're just experiencing a systemic problem. And that in itself is another problem.
Yeah, 100%. And it's just like you're trapped in a problem with no solution, which is another problem. But then when I think as well, I think trying to talk to people who aren't non-disabled, so trying to speak to your parents about it, or your siblings, or your friends who don't have the lived experience, it's like, well, we don't know what to do, you're just depressed, maybe you need to go to see a doctor again. But like when you let that linger, like I let mine linger for so long. Like I self-harmed, I had a failed suicide attempt. Well, obviously it was failed because I'm sitting here today. But I had these experiences that when I look back on now, I'm like, wow, like who was that person? Like how far must I have spiraled to get to that point? And I can remember my mum sitting down in the hospital with me crying when I had done my silly incident, and the nurse was just like, what's changed with him? And my mum was talking about all the depressants I was on, and they were just like, why is he on these? And then my mum was kind of explaining, and I think me and my mum had a really honest conversation following that. It was like, well, actually, I have so much self-loathing that I'm disabled, and I struggle so much. And at that stage, it wasn't just because I was disabled. I had bounced around employment like a yo-yo. Like I had worked in every call centre nearly in Belfast, and I wasn't getting the support. I had more jobs and hot dinners in my 20s, and it wasn't through lack of want. Like I wanted the job, I wanted to develop. But as we know, companies talk about how implicit they are, but once you get through the doors, it's like, well, actually, there's no, pretty much it's like, see you later, bye, good luck, sink or swim. And then 4 months later or a month later, you're like, I can't do this no more. And then you have to cross that vicious cycle of a disabled job seeker again, I need support, and trying to get that support is nada.
And this is such a seamless transition into how disability has or has not impacted your career, because I think at some point all disabled people, regardless of whether it's conscious or unconscious, have to think about their disability when they're thinking about their career. I mean, you and I obviously talk about disability for a good portion of our career, but actually before that, there was still people who were working. And I was wondering, what was it like having to factor in your disability into your career, but also how did it lead to what you do now?
Yeah, so as I said, had more jobs and hot dinners. For me, I was told by a doctor before it that you'll never work in anything other than retail. You'll always stock on shelves. And then when I was in school, like it was around the same time, I had a teacher who was blind himself. And he was fantastic, and he had a guide dog. He'd stand up in the class, and the dog would bark. It was the most well-trained guide dog I've ever met. But this teacher told my mum, was like, he's so smart, he could be a lawyer if he wanted to be. And I always had that in the back of my head. And I think that kind of belief from one teacher can really, really shape, I think, and make a difference. And so when the doctor told me that, don't get me wrong, I believed it for a while, but obviously that voice came back in my head. But I was working in call center jobs, and I mean roles that I definitely should not have been doing, because I was working on a computer all day. I'm registered blind. I have like this time, I have some sight, but it's like what somebody sees in 20 meters, I almost have to be 4 meters close to see exactly what you're seeing. And even then, I won't get every detail. And the best way to probably describe it is when you're standing in like fog, you can't see around you that proximity. Anything beyond, I can't. So that's like what it's like in my vision. But I was going into these roles, and sometimes I wasn't disclosing. I wasn't even saying I'm disabled, because I told them somebody before and they weren't giving me the opportunity, or get rejected or ghosted. So I would go into these opportunities pretending that I was just like everybody else, that I was non-disabled. And then I would come to the onboarding, and I wouldn't be able to do the induction training. And I would like kind of have to say to the trainer, listen, I'm disabled, I can't actually see. Can you give me a copy of the presentation, or can you share it on the computer screen? And it was almost like this dirty, shameful thing that I told them. And all of a sudden it was just like I was getting special attention in the training room. Anything that was being delivered, it was like, Jamie, can you see this? I was like, listen, I'm registered blind. No matter how close you put me to that board, I'm not going to see it because it's tiny writing. Like, send me a copy or give me a physical copy. And it just kept happening. And then I would request it. In some places, I would get adjustments, and it would take months to arrive. And obviously, in those months to arrive, I was using a bog standard computer. So, like, if you're watching me in camera, I was like this trying to use my computer. It's just my head touching against the screen. And that racked my back. And I didn't know until I only found out recently I had back scoliosis. And I'm like, that's why my back is so bad. That's why when I move constantly, I'm in pain. And I was putting myself under so much strain to see these computers. And then the adjustments would come. But then I would get disciplined for having time off, for being sick. because you can't be sick or you
Yeah.
can't have time off if you're waiting for your adjustments. So it was almost like this vicious catch 22 where
Hmm.
if I did share, I was penalized for taking time off for being sick or being sore with my back or for
Hmm.
mental health. Because again, internalized ableism, that mental health element, that really plays in. And when I was in these
Hmm.
jobs, that's when I actually tried to do that silly accent I talked about earlier. I don't know the
Yeah.
words to say it, I apologize. Um,
No,
but
don't apologize at all, because this is your story and how you talk about it is your personal experience. So I would never be like, Jamie, that's wrong.
but yeah, it was very strange because I was in the midst of all this employment and I was not feeling any kind of security. So
Hmm.
I struggled for a long time with employment. And then when I
Yeah.
was 28, I'd worked for, I'm not going to say who I worked for because I won't share them, but you can definitely see it in my LinkedIn if you go through it. But I worked for an agency doing quite a big contract they had. And
Hmm.
in this agency, I had had enough to that point where it's just like, I need help, I need support. And
Yeah.
I'd rented and really candidly. It's like, listen, I'm a disabled job seeker. I have my job CV is my CV is terrible, my job history is terrible, but I want to work. I need somebody to give me a chance. And this agency put me into this role, which seemed great at first, but within the first few months, there was an argument between the agency and the client on who's paying for the adjustments. And in that time, there
Wow.
was all this office gossip going around that I was dramatic, that I was this disabled, angry person because I was not getting what I wanted. And it was like, it's
Absolute
not
standard.
yeah, standard. It was just like, I wasn't angry. I was probably, if anything, disappointed. I was more
Hmm.
disappointed because they had promised me the world. And in that time, I had to take, like, I think it was a month off I had. At one point, I was taking like 20 something tablets a day to manage the pain and to manage my mental health. And it was terrible. And I
Hmm.
stuck with it, don't get me wrong. And I stayed there for like just over a year, which to me was my world record with employment. But it got to the point where that ableism, that systemic ableism was embedded in organizations, it became too much. I was being
Hmm.
referred to as the blind guy or the blind gay guy. And when I was in calls or in training, it was almost that specialness, that I was special came out. And I'd
Yeah.
be like, Jamie, can you see from here? Can you see from here? And I'd be like, I can't see a TV on a 16-inch monitor when I'm at the back of the room. Like, I'm not going to see it. Like, stop, please. And
Hmm.
then it got to the point where my manager started being a bit vicious about my eyesight too, and told me I was using it as an excuse sometimes. And I was just
For
like, okay,
goodness
yeah,
sake.
honestly, I contemplated taking that employee off, but I didn't because it was obviously quite complex when it's an agency and a client.
Yeah.
There was a lot of clash there. But I left, and at that point, I was broken. I was like during the
Hmm.
summer, and I was broken, and I seen this post online from a friend, and it said customer service experience, and I was like, I have that. I have customer service experience. And I
Hmm.
applied for this job, and obviously having a friend there probably don't want to say went in my favor, but they were able to kind of give me a heads up on what
Yeah.
to do for the interview. So I applied and somehow got a job in recruitment, which to me was just like high in God's green earth with my head up at the opposite side of the table. And I hadn't really shared with them during the interview how severe my disability actually was because I
Hmm.
always like to sugarcoat it. I don't know why, but I always try to sugarcoat what I did in the past. And in the
Hmm.
interview, I didn't really tell them, but when I was in the job, it was very noticeable that I'm disabled. Like, I'm using my laptop, and I was like this. I was so close
Hmm.
to it, and my manager pulled me aside one day. She's like, "Do you need a monitor? Let's get you some support." And then we built this relationship where I was actually able to start sharing with them, and I started telling them about my disability. And before I knew it, I was talking on panels about my disability. I joined an
Hmm.
ERG, and for the first time in like, I think 28 years of my life, I felt like what it was like to feel belonging in the workplace,
Yeah.
something I'd never been. And I'm still with that company today, but I think what they did is I always said I felt like Ariel. I came in here with no voice. I had no confidence about my disability. And I thought I was going to
Hmm.
be in that job just for a couple of months to get me by to Christmas. 4 years later, it was actually my anniversary this week. 4 years later, and I'm still here. So it's like it's almost like this 360 moment where it's just like this thing that you've seen as a weakness or this thing that has impacted you for so long, your mental health, this internalized ableism. My career is now built on being a disability accessibility lead. It's sharing my
Yeah.
lived experiences. I have a side hustle on the side talking about disability. And it's just like, it's almost like, again, a catch 22. I love that saying. Because if I didn't go through what I did, I wouldn't be where I am today. But
Yeah.
equally, if I don't know where I'd been if I didn't go through what I did.
Yeah. And it is such a catch-22, and it's also quite unpopular to say that actually sometimes through hardship, whilst it is shit and it is terrible and it is not fun, it can be character building. And actually at the end of it, you usually find that you have either built something around yourself, or there's something about you that you've pulled out from it that's actually really beneficial, later on in life. But actually, it's like, it's so interesting because from what I've listened to in your story, you had one teacher who really believed in you, and then you had someone at work who really believed in you. And it just goes to show that sometimes you just need that one person to fully have your back and really pull you out, because that's the thing, isn't it? A good portion of disabled people get judged inherently by how they look, how they speak, and how they act.
Yeah.
And we need those people who fully support us to be like, actually, no, they're way more than how they look, or how they look, how they speak, how they present. Because if you didn't have that, where would you be now? But equally, I'm so glad you did have that, because now we're here having this conversation.
Exactly.
So let's just pause, recap, rewind. We'll talk about Instagram, because this is the social media channel that I think about the most. So inherently, it's inaccessible for the vast majority of people because of, there's no ID captioning, there's no alt text unless you really search for alt text. But equally, people don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
So this brings me on to, what do you do on your side hustle?
Oh God. So I think I do more than I realized. So initially I started out speaking as a side hustle. So my full-time job was my AMS and this disability inclusion, disability accessibility ERG lead, which is such a mouthful. And I was asked to speak at the side of that from doing a podcast in the past. And I started doing speaking gigs with companies talking about accessibility. And then it kind of led on to, well, do you know what? This is actually great that I'm actually able to talk about this, because I started finding it really therapeutic. And now it's turned into consulting, it's turned into training, it's turned into speaking to like global audiences, and who I generally sit and pinch myself with, or leading conferences that are being keynote speakers. And I'm like, I'm from Belfast and I'm sitting here talking to an organization in Florida about disability accessibility, or I'm supporting a charity in Texas, and I'm sitting in Belfast from my home. So my side hustle, I think, started as me speaking, and then that all stemmed from content creation. I started creating content, and I don't know why. I like graphics. I like things being really simplified. I think it's a neurodivergent. It's just like, oh, I can grasp my hand around it, or it'll stick to me. So I started creating graphics, and that content creation just exploded my world. So it did. Like I got so many opportunities through it. Like I spoke with LinkedIn on their disability panel last year. I was part of the first ever LinkedIn creator program in the UK. And then that just led to like opportunities that honestly, like I'm trying to think at the top of my head, ADHD is just like, I can't get words. But like it was just the network that has opened up for me. Like I'm from Belfast. When you think about Belfast, we're part of the UK, but we're very much not part of the UK because we have our own standing government. We haven't been in government in a long time. That's a whole different side of the conversation. But we are historically kind of just this little island, and Northern Ireland's lovely, yay! But to have your voice in such a global audience, I'm like, how did this happen? Like, because I still have my speech empowerment from when I was a kid. I still go onto calls and panic or get flustered or take people on such random journeys down rabbit holes. But my side hustle from LinkedIn has literally just changed all that, so it has. So I don't know how it happened, but I'm very privileged. I generally feel really privileged where my life has brought me to now.
Yeah. I would love to, if it's okay with you, talk about ADHD, because for you, it wasn't necessarily something that you were diagnosed with early on. And I wonder, what was it that made you actually want to go for a diagnosis of ADHD and then autism, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so I got diagnosed as an adult. So I was officially diagnosed this year, but had self-diagnosed from last year. And it was, again, AMS, like the company I work for full time. I feel like I owe them like a lot, so much. But they had a neurodiversity ERG, which is Employee Resource Group, and they had been hosting sessions around ADHD and what that looked like and what that felt like, and the different kind of variations of experiences. And I can remember sitting there thinking, that sounds like me. Like that really, really
Mm-hmm.
sounds like me. And I don't know if anyone watches me, Cam. I fidget so much, and that was my first
Yeah.
telltale. The person was saying, "Oh, you fidget loads, or you have kind of trouble focusing on things, or you'll hyperfixate." And I was sitting going, "Oh my god, this person's talking about me," and it just kept getting worse and worse. Well, when I say worse,
Mm-hmm.
more things I could relate to. So I had a complete meltdown, panic, and I spoke to my manager. Who I will shout out because she was absolutely brilliant, Rebecca Collis. She kind of had a conversation with me at the time, and she was just like, "Well, why are you worried about this? Like, why would you be worried about ADHD kind of thing?" And I was just like, "Because I'm really disabled. Like, I don't know how to comprehend that
Yeah.
in my head, because when you realize you're neurodivergent or you get that official diagnosis, it's like you get this key to your past, and obviously when you're disabled, you're ready to scrutinize your past. You have the trauma,
Mm-hmm.
like almost like a room full of suitcases that you can take down and unpack at any given
Yeah.
time. And I was going through these suitcases going, "Oh my God, this makes sense for this situation. Oh my God, is
Mm-hmm.
that it wasn't just maybe that I was disabled, maybe because I am autistic or I am ADHD that I struggled to build those relationships or I
Yeah.
struggled with social cues." So for me, it was that conversation with my manager who really encouraged me to go for my diagnosis. And I'm in Northern Ireland, and again, not exactly part of the UK. We are part of the UK, but we don't get the same kind of rights. So in the
Mm-hmm.
mainland, you have right to choose. So you can choose who does your diagnosis for you. We don't have that in
Yeah.
Northern Ireland. On our wait list, I was told it was 6 years. So if I wanted an assessment, I would have to wait 6 years. Unfortunately, with my side hustle, which again,
Uh,
it's just the privilege that I've had from it, was I was like, "Do you know what? I'm going to take this payment and money I've gotten from my side hustle, and I'm going to pay for my diagnosis because I needed the answer.
yeah.
And it's not even that I needed a paper to say this is it. I feel like it was like I just needed somebody to verify it because I was telling people I think I'm self-diagnosed ADHD, but I didn't have a suspicion about the autism. But the
Yeah.
night before the assessment, I was saying to my partner, I was like, "What happens if they tell me I'm autistic? Because I've prepared myself to be ADHD, but I'm not
Yeah.
prepared myself that I can be autistic." And when the assessor at the end of it, they're not meant to tell you straight away, but this person told me at the end, they're like, "You're definitely ADHD, but I'm also very highly suspect that you are autistic." And she made the
Mm-hmm.
referral for my autism assessment a few months later. And I mean, I fell down a rabbit hole of research. I was
Yeah.
following, reading, listening to every podcast. By the way, a lot of the information around neurodivergence is so inaccessible because I
Yeah.
think people fall into this trap where they think, "Oh, bright colours and these fun designs will attract neurodivergent folks." When
Mm-hmm.
really, if you're somebody with distracted disabilities, it's very limited resources there.
Yeah.
And I think I then got that diagnosis, but I think what made me go for them both was like, again, I had the privilege to do so. And
Mm-hmm.
it was like getting an answer for a lot of the things that I put on to myself. Like I've always been very hard on myself. Like if I face an ableism or an accessibility or somebody says something or I lose a job, I was the person who all that blame went on to. I didn't blame the people around me. It was I
Yeah.
blamed myself. And now that I look back and I'm like, wow, that was that rejection sensitivity. That was the ADHD. This is the autism coming in. And
Mm-hmm.
then it was like when you think about the challenges you face and how you handle them or how you react, there's times that I will react to things and it will be the most explosive reaction. And I'll sit back after and be like, "Why did I react like that?" And then I realize, wait a second, that's just I'm not able to regulate my emotions the way everybody else
Yeah.
is able to. So I think for me, there's an intersect with it, which is really like, oh, I've got the answer. But equally, it's almost like, oh, wow, this is like almost fighting with my being registered blind. It's like, this is
Mm-hmm.
affecting this and this triggers that. So it took, and I'm probably still on the journey. And I don't really talk about my neurodivergence online at the moment. And it's because
Yeah.
I thought I had a grasp on it. And the more you
Mm-hmm.
kind of get into it, the more you kind of unlearn and you're constantly like reading what other people are doing to kind of support themselves. And I think when you have those intersect disabilities, it's hard because nobody is talking about being registered blind and neurodivergent
Yeah.
or what works for them because all the resources, like get this book, it's brilliant. And you get it, you can't read it because it's inaccessible or there's no audio
Yeah.
book. So it's trying to get the resources and support. But I think I'm glad I did it. Um,
Yeah.
but I think it's going to be a journey I'm going to be on for a while before I get to the point with my eyesight. Like I can talk about my eyesight till the sun comes home. The sun
Yeah.
comes home and I can articulate about it. But when it comes to neurodivergence, I talk about it and then I find myself after going, is that how I feel about that? Or how do I articulate that better? So it's
Mm-hmm.
still a journey. I think we're all on the journey, aren't we? We're all evolving
Yeah.
constantly.
But I think that that's also a really beautiful space to be in, because
Mm.
actually, yes, they're inaccessible and that isn't fair. But equally, like, you might now be able to create something that's accessible for someone else. And
Oh yeah.
here's the thing. I always think of this, like, as much as you think you're the only version of yourself, or
Yeah.
like, for me, like, I always, not always, but I think, how many other one-handed people do I know? And the list is not really that long. So
No.
when I think about myself, I'm like, oh, there's not very many of us. But actually, there are thousands and thousands
Oh,
and thousands
hundreds.
of us. I
Hundreds
just
of
don't
thousands.
personally know them. So actually, it's good to just turn up and be that person that's there, because you don't know who you're going to be inspiring. But particularly for you, like, you don't know who else you're going to help with the content that you're creating, and the things that you can make and do. And I think actually, yes, it's annoying, and yes, it's very much a journey, but you really have the chance to create something there, and that's an incredible space to be
Oh,
in.
100%. And as the same as my lived experience, it's like I think that's been the motivator for all my work. Like when somebody's
Mm-hmm.
like, when we ask, what's the problem with this recruitment process, or what can we do to be more inclusive? It's just like you look at it through the eyes of your own disability, and then you
Yeah.
get somebody else who's disabled to also share theirs. And it's just like when you start bringing all those different voices to the table, it's like, oh, hold on a second, the solution's here. We just haven't been listening to the solution. And that's the problem, I think, as society in general and our workplaces, is that they don't listen to the voices of lived experience, which is why I'm such an advocate of employee resource groups. Because
Yeah.
without AMS's resource group, I wouldn't have known I was neurodivergent. I wouldn't be standing talking about my disability. And nearly 4 years later, I would be standing talking on this podcast or having a career
Yeah.
that I do as a side hustle. So I think it's empowering for an individual to be part of that community, because many
Mm-hmm.
of us don't know it exists, or there's groups of charities that we get involved in, but it doesn't go beyond that, maybe meeting every so often or that residential.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's having that
Yeah.
constant.
So, do you have a piece of advice for a younger version of you? So if
God.
Jamie from like 20 years ago is sat with you having this conversation, is there a piece of advice that you would give him?
So, to this question makes me think of my nephew, because my nephew has the same genetic condition I have. So, my condition's
Mm-hmm.
hereditary. Women pass it on to the son. So, when I see the questions beforehand, I kept thinking to my nephew, it's like, what would I say to my nephew? Because he has all this to come.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it is, oh, God, this is hard. This is really hard. Um, it's around internalized ableism. I think it's find that power to talk about how you're feeling, because as
Mm-hmm.
disabled young people, we're often told how we're feeling. We're wrapped
Yeah.
up in that cotton wool, as you said earlier, or I say bubble wrap, like the bubble wrap you pop.
Yeah.
Have the confidence to say, stop, let me talk. This is how I actually feel. Because a lot of decisions that was made for me in my life, and my mum is amazing, so I don't want my mum to listen to this and think, oh my God, this is me. I'm not talking about you. It was the teachers, it was the educators, it was the
Yeah.
social workers who made the decisions for me in education. That they never listened to what I had to say, or the
Mm-hmm.
teacher who used to make me do that special work. Um, I think it's use your voice, talk about how you
Yeah.
feel, and if that person doesn't listen, find somebody else to listen, because you will find that one person who will stop and say, hold on, this isn't right. Let me speak on your
Mm-hmm.
behalf. And because that's when your allyship comes in, and that's how you know you found that one person who can support you. And again, it goes back to having that one teacher, that one person who believes in you,
Yeah.
and the difference it can make. So I would say open up. And for me personally, for males, would be it's okay to get emotional and cry. Because I was always told you couldn't. Crying makes you gay. Well, I must have cried an awful lot, but I definitely did. But I don't think I think it's being able to talk about emotions, whether you're male,
Mm-hmm.
female, trans, non-binary. Being able to have that conversation is such an empowering thing.
Yeah. And I love that as well. Like, find your voice and be able to use it, because I think you're so right, especially as disabled children, you are so often told how to feel, how to think, how to do. Like, I remember someone telling me how to hold a yogurt pot,
Oh my
and I was like,
God.
that you teaching me how to hold a yogurt pot is literally not going to change my life. Like, I'm going to hold it however I need to hold it. This is not a physiotherapist type vibe. Like, I don't need to have this from you, but it's so true. You're so told how to navigate this world, and actually, like, learn to use the power of your own voice and navigate it for yourself is
Yeah.
is so invaluable. As we've already touched on, through hardship there can be some good twinkly sparkly moments at the end of it, and I was wondering, on reflection of looking back through your own hardships that you've been through, is there a positive trait that you've noticed about yourself that actually you're quite proud of?
Oh God, that's a hard question. That's a really hard question. I think I didn't know it, and I know it's probably a silly response, but I probably didn't realize how strong I was. Like I used to consider
Yeah.
myself quite a weak person. Like when you grow up being told you can't cry because you're gay, or you need to be masculine, or you need to be more
Yeah.
butch. I was always told, even by teachers. That teacher told my mum that I wasn't masculine enough, and if I didn't man up, that I was going to get bullied. I was being bullied, so it didn't matter if I manned up or not.
Yeah.
So for me, I think it was the strength, because I had so much strength. Obviously, to make it, I think any disabled young person who makes it through education, you are stronger than you think, because we made it through. And then I think being a disabled job seeker, the strength and determination that it takes to continuously go, despite the rejections, despite being ghosted, despite being told it's not your disability, but the last thing you told them was you're disabled. I think the strength to keep going through that, but equally the internalized ableism side. Like when I say I had so much internalized, I couldn't even tell people I was disabled. I would get in fights physically with my family or my parents if they said anything about my disability. I would slam doors, I would throw things. Like it was like my emotions kicked in too much. So to even get to the point now where I talk about disability and to make it through those challenges where I did try to end my life, and my mom and dad were beside me and my siblings. I think the strength to have for my family as well. So for me, it's the strength that I never knew that I would have.
Yeah. Oh, Jamie, I just
That
want to
got
like
so
give you
deep.
no, I just want to give you like a big hug because I love everything that you've said because I think it's so poignant, and particularly when we're talking about internalized ableism, I really don't think people realize how much it affects disabled
No,
people. And it's such an awkward conversation, right? It's not nice to have these conversations. But if we don't have them, who else is going to suffer because we didn't have the guts to have these conversations? And I really want to thank you for sharing these experiences because I know that it's not easy to talk about these things, and it's horrible, but equally in equal measurements, heartwarming to hear about these stories because you're not there now.
Yeah.
But equally, you have that lived experience where you can talk about it and be like, do you know what? It is really shit. It's not
100%.
ideal at all, but actually, we can have these conversations. We can talk about it, even though it's uncomfortable, even though it's awkward. We need to be having them because there's going to be someone who hears this and is like, that's me. I'm not the only one. And that's like, we will never know that that person's heard it. But actually, like we've done our jobs as like good disabled as good disabled people, but I also equally hate the phrase good disabled person anyway. So
it's better than angry disabled person at least.
so true.
And like I agree with that 100%. And I think that's why I like creating my content as well. Like I think even if my side hustle, if I invent something overnight or something happens with my business where I suddenly blow up or I get really I get money to buy my own house, because that's what I want ultimately. I want my own house and I want to have a garden for my dogs. That's all I want in life. And to enjoy what I'm doing. But I think if I ever get to that point where I don't content create, I would be so sad, because for me, my content, like that one person who comments on it or that one person who reaches out, that connection, knowing that your content has helped somebody, or knowing that the graphics that you've made is helping classrooms in America or different places, it's like that's the difference. One person seeing that will make a difference. Because I wish, again, when I was younger, I just wish one person would have came along and said the same to me or showed me some of my graphics, because it probably would have completely changed my little mind.
Yeah, exactly. It's like literally exactly that point. Oh gosh, I love it. I love it. I love it. So I love having these conversations so much. But let's make it a little bit more lighthearted now, because I always think as disabled people, we get asked some quite bizarre questions about how our bodies work. And it doesn't matter like what your disability is, people are always curious as to how things work. So I always say that the weirdest question that I consistently get asked is, has a shark bitten your arm off? And that is because I think when I was younger, it was around about that time that the girl who went in surfing in Australia and she did get her arm bitten off by a shark, right? So like that was like the famous story, like, oh, all one-handed girls, all of them, like a shark bit their arm off. And I always think actually, like I live in England, which means England is an island, but there are no sharks around England, and it would have been front page news and you would have seen my face. Now, I have not been front page news and you haven't seen my face. So the likeliness is that I did not have my arm bitten off by a shark. But when it comes to these weird and wonderful questions, I find that there's quite often a few that are always repeated. And I wondered, do you have a particular set that are consistently repeated for you?
Oh, I always get, where's my guide dog? Where's your guide dog? Or where's your cane? Or can you see this? And then they give you the middle finger. And it's like, I have sight in front of me. Like, come on. Like, if you take a few feet back, maybe I won't see you. But yeah, that's probably the one that annoys me most is, can you see us? And they give you the fingers. And it's like,
Yeah.
you're flipping me off as you ask me a question. And it's just like, at times I have just turned around and went, oh no, I can't see that. Just pure out of spite, because I'm like, I'm not going to dignify your rudeness with a response. But equally, there's times where I blew up because, again, my emotions don't regulate. So I think those ableist, there's such ableist questions. This is like one disabled person's like another, and we're all disabilities, this one binary thing. And one that I really probably don't like and I get all the time is, you don't look disabled. And I'm like, well, what am I meant to look like? Because, as I said, I track disabilities like Pokemon cards. If I was going to be a representative of all these disabilities, what am I meant to look like? Because there's no handbook for me to follow. So you tell me how I should look, and I'll come back dressed as well. How about that? Like, it's just ableism at its finest, and I think it comes from that concept of people don't learn about ableism. They don't learn about the diversity of disability. We're also conditioned by one symbol, which is that wheelchair symbol, which is on bathroom doors, is on bumper stickers, is on boots. And it's like, this symbol is meant to represent this diverse community, but represents only 7% of that community. Because only is it 7 or 8%
Yeah, it's 7%,
people are wheelchair users. So it's just like, well, what about the other 93% of us? Like, I don't need a symbol. I'm not saying we need different symbols, but I'm like, people are so conditioned to see disability as one thing. And so when you show up as your authentic self and they're like, well, that doesn't match my stereotype. Yeah. All that is ableism coming out. It's just like, if we educated that, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in today.
Exactly that point. I only have one final question for you, Jamie. And I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And that is, Jamie, are you disabled and proud?
Oh, I'm disabled and so fudging proud. And I think anyone who doesn't feel, there will be days where you don't feel proud, don't get me wrong, there's days I get up, but I will have an argument with myself, or I'll not get out of bed, my ADHD will kick in. It's like pure rejection sensitivity disorder, pure rejection sensitivity, or I have just almost like it's an outsider who's like, nope, you're not doing anything today. There's days where I'm not proud, but am I proud? I'm so proud, because I think being disabled is more than your condition, or if you call it empowerment, whatever you call it, whatever that way to identify as, it's more than that. It's the determination that we have to navigate a society that disables us every day, a society that is so systematically ableist, but we still show up time and time again, and most of the time with a smile on our face or words to say, but we still show up.
Yeah. Jamie, I have absolutely loved this conversation. And I know I've said thank you before, but I'm going to say it again, because you've spoken about some really heavy topics for you. And I know it's not always easy to talk about these things. So I really want to thank you for sharing your story on this podcast, because I think, as I said, like, we don't know who it's going to help, but it will help someone. And that's invaluable. And actually, having these conversations all the time just make me so happy, because it makes me realize that the world is changing for disabled people. And like, it's so nice to think that maybe we're a small part of that change. And 100%. Thank you so much for coming on.
No thanks needed. Honestly, it's like therapy sessions we talk about this, and I don't think I've ever talked about that in a podcast before. I think I've ever maybe alluded to it. So it's the first time I've been that open. So you got me singing like a canary bird. So thank you for giving me the therapy session.
It's all right. Next time I'll charge.
Okay, no problem.
No, but honestly, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for giving up time in your day to have these conversations. I've loved it, and it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.